Well, over the last 2 weeks, I've spent a lot of time with my family. I was able to go to Florida on a vacation, and we went to Magic Kingdom and spent the day there. And you see every walk of life come into that place from all corners of the world. It's one of my favorite things is hearing so many different languages, and it was just great to be there. We went to Disney Boardwalk, and at Disney Boardwalk, if you've never been there, there's a big hotel. Like, that's an unbelievable hotel, and so we jumped on our phone, just seeing how much it would cost. And the minimum room there is $500 at the Boardwalk. We didn't stay there, but we saw it, like, man, that's unbelievable. And then the next week, I went to Oklahoma City, where my mom lives. And in her area, it's where I grew up. It's really becoming impoverished. Like every corner has panhandlers. Every corner has people asking for money. And actually in Oklahoma City, it's illegal to do that. They don't run them off as long as they're not aggressive. So poverty is all around where my mom lives. And so I kind of saw both extremes within about a week of each other. I flew on 6 airplanes over the last 2 weeks. And if you're like me, I love to watch people. I love airports are one of my favorite places. I'm always wondering, who are they? Where are they going? What are they leaving? What is their story? Because this is what I know, no matter if I was at Disney or if I was in Oklahoma City or if I was on an airplane, I know that everyone is different. Everybody's different, but everyone has a story. Everybody has a story. Everybody's story is different and unique, but everyone has a story. We're going to look at this encounter this morning of some people who have these stories. And we're going to see their story be invaded by Jesus. And we're going to see these 2 guys, Paul and Silas, really a group of guys, who are going to play a role in these guys' story. We're going to be in what's called the book of Acts. The book of Acts. If you don't own a Bible, there should be one around you. You can take that. That's our gift to you. You can have that if you don't have a Bible. We'll have a page number up there for you if that helps you. It's called the book of Acts, but it's really what it is. It's the Acts of the Apostles, the first followers of Jesus. This is the beginning of the early church. A very small group of men have an encounter with Jesus, and from them this movement begins. This movement begins with a very small group of people. And if you look in Acts 2 and Acts 4, we see that like 3,000 people join this movement. They begin to follow Jesus. And then in chapter 4, it's up to 5,000 men. That's not even including women and children. So this is happening very fast. And then that part, those are huge numbers. But what we know is numbers represent people. Numbers represent people. And so in those 3,000, in those 5,000, there's a lot of stories and a lot of people. But here in Acts 16, we're going to look at very, very specific 3 people's stories. And this guy named Paul and Silas are going to be the ones who are leading this movement in this part of Acts. And this is what I know, that everywhere everywhere this movement is going, they're facing persecution. The early church grew like crazy in the midst of persecution. And actually, around our world right now, the areas where the gospel is spreading, the good news of Jesus, the area it's spreading the most are those areas where there's massive persecution. Massive persecution. People are losing their lives because they believe the gospel, because they confess to follow Jesus, because they're telling other people about it, and it's spreading like crazy. This is the movement that we're a part of. And here in America, we have to be very, very careful when we talk about the church being persecuted and Christians being persecuted. I think we are more than maybe ever, but we have to be careful that we understand what it looks like for people around the world. That I got to be honest, I'm not afraid today. I'm not afraid today to stand before you and to read the scriptures and to pray and to preach. But there are people who are. And this is where Paul and Silas find themselves. And Paul, the crazy part of the story is that Paul was doing it. Yeah. We talk about this a lot. I think it's important to understand that these are real people who are writing this. They have real stories. And so Paul was a good Jew, a good moral Jew. He did what he was supposed to. And he hated the idea of Jesus. He hated that people were following Jesus, so much so he was persecuting them. This won't be up there, but this is what it says in Acts 9. It says this. Meanwhile, Saul, who later becomes Paul, it says, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples, those who were following Jesus. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way of following Jesus, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. So he wants the permission to, hey, let me go find all those who are following Jesus. Let me bring them back and imprison them. This is what's happening in Saul's life. And then all of a sudden he has this radical encounter with Jesus, and he's blinded for a period of time, and then his life is never the same. He begins to follow Jesus. He begins to plant churches. He begins to write letters to churches. He helps correct churches. He helps encourage those who are following Jesus. This is who is doing what we're going to talk about today. He has this life-changing encounter with God. And so Christianity is being born into a culture that's not open to it. Not open to it at all. It sounded dangerous. If you follow Jesus, your life is in danger. It sounded outrageous that the God of the universe, the creator of everything, would leave heaven, would step into our midst, would be brutally beaten, die, and come back to life for you and I. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. So people are like, do I really want to be a part of that? But the case for Jesus was being made with such boldness and with such courage that people believed. People believed and their lives were changed. And so we're going to look at 3 stories. I'm going to explain a little bit as we go through this. Each story, we'll look at some details for it, and then at the end, we'll kind of have 3 overarching themes that are for all of these stories and how they'll apply to our lives. Now, this is what I don't want. I don't want this to be just a story that we look at. We can't just read this and not be moved by it. That's my goal this morning, is that you are moved by what we look at today, that there is a response to what you hear. All right, so we're going to jump into Acts 16. If you have a Bible or smartphone, however you want to look at that. 16:11 through 15. It says, from Troas we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace, and next day on to Neapolis. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath we went outside the city gate to the river. We were expecting to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira. It was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. Okay, a couple of things let's pull out. One, it's amazing that Paul takes this message to the women. Because in that day and age, the women were almost less human than men. They weren't seen as important, and so they were almost on the same level as a slave. And so Paul takes this message and he takes it right to the women. And then there's one woman in the midst of that named Lydia who responds to this message. Now, who is Lydia? Lydia is a dealer in purple cloth. Now, that's what we know about that. We know she was extremely wealthy. Purple cloth was extremely expensive because purple dye was expensive. And so this woman had done well. She probably ran her own business, maybe was the CEO of her business, where she was from, where she was at in Philippi. These were the leading areas of culture. It'd be kind of like London, New York, LA, and so she's doing her thing, and she's doing it well. It also tells us that she was a religious person because it says that she was a worshiper of God. Now, what does that mean? That can mean a lot of things, especially for us today, but what does that mean here? It means that she was not a Jew, so she was a Gentile, but she was reading the Hebrew Bible. So she was reading the Old Testament, so she knew all the laws. So if you know the Old Testament, and maybe you don't, but the 10 Commandments are found there, and so she would have known those. And so she would have worked really hard at being a really moral person. She had probably been very conservative. She was at a place of prayer, and so she was investigating and pursuing God. She was a religious person. So you could say that Lydia had it all together. She didn't need anything. She had everything she wanted. She lived in the right neighborhood. Her kids probably went to the right school. Everything was good for her. But something happens. Paul takes this message into the religious people. He takes it into a group of people who are doing all right. They're not the people who are all messed up and all broken as we would possibly see them. But she hears this message, and what's the message that she responds to? The message that Paul brings is the message of Jesus. And so Lydia had been probably working really hard at being a good person. So she probably thought, if I am good, then God is pleased with me. God's pleasure is found in my goodness, not who I am. And then Paul comes along and says, look, the story has somewhat been fulfilled. That Jesus comes and all those things you know, Jesus is the answer to all that. So you know the rules you're trying to follow? You'll never be able to. You'll never be able to. You can pursue it, and it's good to pursue what God wants for you, but look, you're going to fail. But guess what? There's Jesus. Jesus comes, and he lives that perfect life, and he dies the death we should so that you can find life. And she would have known the sacrificial system. She would have known things had to die, that priests made sacrifices for the forgiveness of people's sins. She knew that, and so Paul would have said, look, that's Jesus. Jesus comes to fulfill that. So she wants this lady to understand, look, it's not just about being at the right place. It's not just about knowing the right things or saying the right words. It's not just about being religious. It's about knowing who Jesus is and believing in him. And believing in him. So here's the problem between religion and following Jesus or Christianity. A guy's name's Tim Keller. He has a ministry up in New York City. He talks a lot about this and a lot about religion versus Christianity. And I've heard him say this: religion is about outside in. If I live right and do everything I'm supposed to, then God is pleased with me. Then he'll bless me. If I obey him, then he'll take care of me. However, Christianity or following Jesus is about the inside out. That God, through Jesus Christ, loves me and dies for me, forgives me, and therefore my life is forever changed. My heart is changed. Therefore, I please God. Two very different things. My religion says I'm good or I'll be good, and then God will take care of me. So a lot of people follow God because he seems useful. I'll obey because he's useful. If I do the right things, then God will take care of me. What happens when he doesn't? Not that he doesn't take care of you, but what happens when people get sick? Yeah, look, God, I've been good. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. This is in the scriptures in a lot of places. Someone's blind, someone's mute, someone's paralyzed. And in that day and age, people thought, well, you must be cursed by God. What'd you do wrong? I don't think that's different for where we're at today. We do everything we're supposed to do, and when things don't work out, we question God. God, what's going on? Where are you? It's because we're stuck in religion. But Christianity says, no. God is beautiful. God is all loving and all knowing, and he takes care of me even in the midst of that. And because of that, I'll follow him. It's two very, very different things. And so Lydia had been religious. And so in her religiousness, she also needed the gospel. Some of you, that's your story. You grew up in church, you heard it forever, you would have considered yourself a good, moral person, but at some point you understood there was more. And that more was understanding Jesus' love and his forgiveness. That's some of your stories. Some of you are in the middle of that story. Some of you are here and you're like, yeah, I'm here every week, I volunteer, I do what I'm supposed to do. God has got to be pleased with me. But you've left Jesus out of the equation. And so for you, you need to hear the story that the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is for you in the middle of your religiousness. At Disney, we park, and we got a running stroller for my son who's 5, and we go up, and you have to get on this ferry, and so you go across this little lake before you enter into Magic Kingdom. And so on the way over, I realized the tires on my stroller are flat. I'd realized they were kind of going flat, and I kept forgetting, and so they're like flat, and so Heather's, my wife's cousin, was with us, and he just happened to have an air pump with him. I don't know, it was a miracle. And so he's like, hey, you need one of these? I'm like, yes. And so he pulls it out, airs up my tires. I'm like, all right, we're good to go. And so the ferry gets to the end of the lake, and we park, and I get off, and all of a sudden my stroller won't roll. I'm like, what in the world is wrong with this? And so I pop it back on 2 wheels, and I go up, and we get into Disney, and I put it down, and I realized that at the front tire, there's a bolt that goes through and a nut, and it had come loose. It had come apart. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We've been waiting for this. We finally get into Magic Kingdom, and this happens. And so someone's like, look, they'll fix strollers for you. Disney's unbelievable. They have like a stroller fixing area. And so I'm like, all right, that's great. And so this lady takes me back in the back. And the whole time I'm thinking, I'm here, but I'm not here. I'm in the gates. I'm in Magic Kingdom, but I'm not with my family. Like, see you, we're going to see Mickey. Literally, they're going to see Mickey. And I'm like, all right, have fun. I'm going to do the stroller. And so I'm there and I'm thinking, this isn't fun. This isn't the point. The point isn't just to get into Magic Kingdom. mean, the point is to experience everything it has to offer me. Everything. And some of you are living out your faith that way. You come and you sit here and you're like, I'm here. I'm here. Man, you're missing it. You're missing out on so much more, and that's this free gift. And I think that religious people have a really hard time understanding grace. The longer you're here, the longer you're in a church building, I think the harder it is to understand that God really loves you and forgives you. Like if you're completely messed up and you're broken and you hear this message, you're like, oh man, I need that. But oftentimes the most religious people, the people who have been here the longest, we forget it. We forget it. And then when we hear people talk about it, we're like, I don't know if that's really true. I mean, I need to do something for it. We got back from Magic Kingdom, and my family, we landed at 9:30, and my in-laws who went with us, they were landing at 1:30. Well, we had so much stuff. We had to have one of those hard top carriers on our van so we could just get home from the airport. And so we get home and we unload, and a little while later, I have to head back to the airport to get my mother and father-in-law. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go in and I'm going to help my father-in-law get all their luggage. And so I go into the Lambert airport and I go into the garage, and all of a sudden I hear this boom, boom. I'm like, what is that? What's that noise? So I keep going and I hear this boom, boom. And I'm like, what is the carrier? And so I get out and I'm now down in the concrete area of the parking garage. Right? And I'm stuck between two areas of the concrete garage. Cars are backing out, cars are coming around, and to say it lightly, I'm frustrated. And so I have to take the carrier off. Okay, so in the garage, I take the carrier off, and I have to put it in my back seat. I drive back up top, I have to put the carrier back on, and I run in to get Charlie and Renee. So I get my in-laws, and we go back out, and we go to the car, and we go to the little terminal to pay to leave, and I'm there to give the $5 to pay for parking, and she says, I need your ticket. I can't find my ticket. And if you don't know this, they charge you the maximum fee. The maximum fee. So she says, that'll be $23. I'm like, hold on. I'm like looking everywhere I could possibly look. I'm going to find this ticket. And then Charlie, my father-in-law, says, don't worry. Don't worry about it. So I get my wallet out and I get to pay, and Charlie says, no, I'll pay for it. No, this is my fault. I was in the wrong. I lost the ticket. I made the mistake. You can't pay for it. No, you're not paying for it. I'm paying for it. That's grace. That's grace. That it was clearly my fault. But someone else intervenes. Someone else says, no, I'll take care of it. So if you find yourself here today and you're really religious, you need the gospel. You need to understand that God comes for you through Jesus, that he rescues you out of your religiousness. Okay, second story. This one's quicker. Acts 16 through 19. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, again, they find themselves going there. We were met by a slave girl who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so troubled that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her. When the owners of the slave girl realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. Okay, so we have Lydia, who's got everything together. You would look at her life and you would say, that's the life. She has everything together. But then Paul and Silas encounter this slave girl who doesn't have anything together. She's been oppressed. She's probably been abused. Someone's probably forced this on her. She wasn't a moral person because she's opened herself up to the demonic. That this is who they encounter. And it sounds like she's kind of like a hype man for Paul and Silas. She's going ahead of them saying, hey, here's these guys. They're going to tell you how to be saved. But really, she was mocking. She was mocking the message of Jesus. She was distracting people from hearing the message of Jesus. In one translation, Paul says that he is annoyed. He's annoyed. So he calls the spirit out. Now, when Jesus talks about demonic spirits in Matthew 12, he talks about when a spirit leaves, if nothing takes that space, goodness, the Spirit of God, the spirit will come back and bring more with it. But we know that because the slave owners are upset, that something else takes the place in the heart of this young slave girl. And what takes the place is the Spirit of God. So we have Lydia who has it all together, but she needs to hear the gospel. And then we have this little slave girl who doesn't have anything together, and she needs someone to rescue her. And Paul and Silas intervene, and they rescue her. And so maybe that's where you find yourself today. Maybe you hear the story of Lydia, and you're like, that's not me at all. But your story was, man, I was addicted, I was confused, I was oppressed, and somehow, somewhere, God intervenes. And maybe that's where you find yourself right now. Maybe you feel oppressed, maybe you feel down, and you think there's nothing good that can happen in my life. But there is. And the only way that happens is because of Jesus. In the name of Jesus, the demonic comes out of this slave girl, and her life is changed forever. So 2 different people, 2 different stories, but one gospel message. It's the same message for both people, and they both have the same result. All right, last one, Acts 16, 20 through 24. It says, they brought them before the magistrates or the judges and said, these men are Jews, and they are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. Upon receiving such orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. As I said earlier, Paul and Silas are going to be massively persecuted for what they're preaching. And it's this message of grace. And the Romans are like, no, we can't do that. We need our people to be beaten down. We need our people to be under our control. We can't talk about this grace of God. And so they abuse them, and then they throw them into prison, but not just prison, but the inner cell. And so the jails in this time history says they were one level, and then the inner cell actually came down. And so human waste would flow down into the inner cell. So Paul and Silas find themselves there, and they find themselves in these stocks. And in the Roman prison, the stocks had several different holes for legs. And they would stretch them as far as they possibly could and put them in a horrible, uncomfortable, painful position. So this is where Paul and Silas find themselves. Verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Let's just stop real quick right there. That's crazy. It's crazy. I don't know if that's what I would have been doing. Look, that's not what I do oftentimes. When difficult things happen, when I'm down or I'm discouraged or I feel like God doesn't answer my simple prayers that I'm asking, I don't necessarily find myself singing and praising him. Just be honest. But Paul and Silas in this position, that they're choosing to sing and to worship. Their worship for God was not based on circumstances or situations. That they had been radically changed, so it didn't matter what was happening in their life. That they were going to worship God. Verse 26. It says, suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open, and everybody's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, don't harm yourselves, we are all here. The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, sirs, what must I do to be saved? They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household. Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to others in his house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his family were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole family. So a couple things here. The doors come open, and in my opinion, Paul and Silas have this chance to escape. They have a chance to find freedom. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what man was trying to do, they were going to hinder me. The story couldn't go out. Now I'm free. I'm going out, and I'm going to continue to preach the message. But it's like Paul knows that this supernatural intervention, this freedom of the jail cells being open, wasn't for them. It wasn't for them at all. It was completely for the jailer. It was for the jailer. And so Paul and Silas, they stay exactly where they are, but the jailer thinks they've left, and so he's going to take his own life. And here's why. Because the Roman guards, if someone escaped on their duty, they would have to take on the punishment of their prisoners. So this jailer's life was done. If Paul and Silas are gone, then he would take their place unless someone intervened. And so Paul intervenes by not leaving. And the jailer's response, and this is what's fascinating to me, is this jailer was probably an ex-Roman soldier. So part of his retirement package was probably come run a jail cell. You be a jailer, you've done a good job as a soldier, so you come do this. So this guy was brutal, he was barbaric, and he probably would have been one of the ones who had just recently beaten Paul and Silas. At his hands, Paul and Silas were whipped and flogged and almost killed. And now he's standing before them both, and he drops down and he's trembling. Something is going on here. I mean, had this jailer heard Paul and Silas preach? Had he been out one day and he had heard the message that Paul was given, that there was this grace and forgiveness for everyone? And the jailer at some point probably thought, not me. I'm way too far gone. Do you know what a Roman soldier does? Do you know how brutal Rome was during this time? They would crucify men, women, and children along the roads into the city just to make sure that everyone knew not to rebel. At times, 20,000 people would be crucified along the road. As a reminder, do you know who we are as a Roman Empire? That's who this guy was. And he's broken. He's broken. And his question is, how can I be saved? How can I be saved? Again, 3 people, 3 stories, 1 gospel message. And Paul and Silas says, Jesus. To believe, it's this word pistis, which means to put your faith in or to trust in or to cling to. So look, jailer, I know what your lives look like. I know you're barbaric. I know you're a horrible person. But you're not too far gone from God's grace. Maybe you don't feel like you're quite there, but you understand his story. You think, man, I've made too many mistakes. Do you know the life I've lived? God does. And God would say to you, he would preach the message that Paul is preaching, that you're not too far gone. You're not too far gone. And he responds, the jailer responds, a lot like Lydia. And here's what happens is, because of their faith and their belief, their whole household believes. So the response of one person changes the future for their whole family. Changes the future for the whole family. That could be you. That could be your story, that at some point you believed, and the generations after you have been changed because of your belief. You could be a teenager here today. A lot of you are here by yourself, without family. You could be changing the future generation of your family forever because you believe. So this jailer, Lydia, their households believe, and then they're baptized. They're baptized, and what that does, that signifies that God had done something in their heart. That it was a sign that this inner grace had taken over, and so they immersed themselves in water and they're baptized. Now here's 3 overarching things, just really, really quickly, that we're gonna apply to all these. Number 1, the gospel, the good news of Jesus, does not judge. So there's no religious type, there's no certain type that can accept this message. I hear that a lot from people as I interact. I'm not really religious. All right. Are you a human? Are you a person? If so, this message is for you. It's amazing, actually, if you look at the history of Christianity, there's not been really one certain group of people who have dominated it. It is literally reaching the ends of the earth. That every tongue, every culture, every race is experiencing the good news of the gospel. That young, middle-aged, and older are experiencing the good news of the message. That poor, middle class, and the rich all can understand and accept the gift of the gospel. That it does not judge. That it's not just for Americans, but it's for the whole world. So, the moment you and I begin to say, well, the gospel's not for them. Or the moment we begin to say, or we lose hope for a person or a certain group of people, we're really being more religious than we are being followers of Jesus. And we don't really understand the gospel. Because the gospel doesn't judge. The gospel is for everyone. The second thing is the gospel is a great unifying force. It unifies people. I mean, if we just look around how different each one of us are here and our stories and our backgrounds, but there's this family, there's this community that takes place, and it's only because of the gospel. Paul, as I said earlier, was a good Jew, and so good Jewish men every morning would get up and say their daily blessings, their daily prayers. And they would say things like this: thank you, God, for making the rooster be able to distinguish between the morning and the night. Thank you for feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. But then Jewish men would say this: blessed are you, O God, King of the universe, who has not made me a goy or a Gentile, a non-Jew. So who has not made me a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. So good Jewish men would get up and say, thank you, God, for not making me a Gentile, a slave, or a woman. Paul would have prayed this. What's fascinating to me is that these are the three people that Paul interacts with. These are the three people that hear the gospel of Jesus. And the only reason that Paul is able to do that is because of Jesus, because something has happened in his heart and in his life. And so for us, we have to begin to see that the gospel unites us with people who are not like us, people who are different than us, who think differently or come from different places. And that the church should be made up of all types of people with all types of stories and all types of backgrounds. And the only reason we can do life together is because of Jesus and the gospel. And then the third thing, the gospel demands a response. The gospel demands a response. So Lydia responds to the good news and wants to be baptized, her and her whole family. The jailer asked, okay, I've heard the gospel, how can I be saved? How can I be saved? And Paul and Silas very clearly says, well, you believe. You believe, you trust in, you put your faith in God. And then he also is baptized. This is what is really important, and hear me. Baptism is not this thing that you eventually get to. Maybe you're here today, you don't know what baptism is. It's this moment where you're submersed in water. It's this picture of dying to yourself and being raised up to this new life. And a lot of followers of Jesus haven't been baptized, and this is what they often say: I'm just not ready yet. Just not there yet. I got some things I got to work on. I got to fix some things in my life. Then I'll be baptized. Lydia immediately baptized me. This is my new life. The jailer, it's probably 2, 3 in the morning, doesn't wait. He doesn't say, well, I got to take care of some stuff first. In the moment, he responds and says, I have to be baptized. If you've never been baptized and you say you're a follower of Jesus, what's your reason? What's your excuse? We love to baptize people because it's your story. It's your story how God has intervened in your life and rescued you. And so if you've never been baptized, please, even today after the service, come talk to me. Let's figure out what that looks like if you have questions, if you don't understand. But it is this moment where you fully submerge yourself into the ways of Jesus. Doesn't mean it fixes everything. It doesn't mean you'll never make a mistake again. It's just saying you're all in. You're all in. And then last point. There is a change in Lydia's life. She immediately says, how can I take care of you, Paul and Silas? There's this hospitality that takes place. So I'm just guessing, not always, but I'm just guessing, she had got to where she was because she was a me-first person. She was a successful business person. She did what she needed to do. And in that moment, she said, all right, it's no longer about me. Paul, Silas, what can I do for you? Something changes in her heart. The jailer takes Paul and Silas and doctors their wounds. What he possibly did to them, he then says, let me make it right. He feeds them a meal. Their life is changed. They look different. It demands a response. We can't hear the gospel, we can't believe the gospel, and then look the same. We can't look the same. So the gospel comes, and it's for the religious. The gospel comes, and it's for those who mock it, those who are oppressed, those who are broken. The gospel is for them. It's for you. And the gospel is for the angry, the bitter, the people who have a horrible past. The gospel, the good news of Jesus, is for them. It's for you. It is for us. But you must respond, and I must respond. Let's pray. God, thanks for today. Thanks for this message of truth, of this message of hope, that none of us are so good that we don't need you, God. And that none of us are so bad and so far gone that we can't get your grace. Would you help us? Would you speak to the person here today who has wanted to take that step in baptism? Would you encourage them today, even as the enemy maybe begins to speak and tell them why they can't do it? Would you begin to encourage them and help them? Would you help each one of us to respond to the gospel in a way that it changes our lives completely, that we can't be the same after accepting it, after believing it, and allowing it to change our hearts and our lives? Thank you, God, for rescuing me as a teenage boy, that in the midst of my brokenness and my story, that you stepped in and you intervened. I'm forever grateful for that, God. I'm thankful that you continue to do that in the lives around me. And our prayer is that you'll continue to open our hearts and the hearts of those around us to hear your message. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Love you guys. See you next week.